There we go. Are we ready?
Yes, and again, please accept my apologies. I've been awake since 4:30, so.
No worries, thank you. All right, great. Our next speaker will be Leo Rotem, and he's going to tell us about simple and efficient batch verification techniques for VDFs.
All right, so thank you. As Daniel mentioned, I'm Leo, and I'll talk about batch verification for VDFs. So before we talk about verifiability, So before we talk about verifiability, let's define delay functions. So roughly speaking, a delay function is a function which is efficiently computable, but only in a manner which is inherently sequential. So one way to formalize this is by introducing an additional delay parameter t, and then given this delay parameter, the function should be computable in some time polynomial in t, but it shouldn't be easy to evaluate the function on a randomly chosen input in time less than t, even with preprocessing and a polynomial number of power processors. Now, the focus of this work is about verifiable delay functions, and we'll focus about the verifiability of delay functions, so you can forget about the previous slide. And unsurprisingly, a verifiable delay function is a delay function which allows for efficient verification. So what do we mean by that? Given the input x to the function, you should be able to produce alongside the output f of x a short proof pi asserting the validity of this output with respect to the input x. Then given x, f of x, and this short proof pi, one should be able to verify quickly that f of x is indeed the correct output of the function on input x. And by quickly, we typically mean much quicker than the trivial verification time that will resolve by simply computing the function nu. Now, even though this is a relatively recent notion, it already has many applications in cryptography and beyond. So just to name a few, we have proofs of application, verifiable randomness beacons, computational timestamping, resource-efficient blockchains, and much more than that. And the main way we currently know how to construct verifiable delay functions is by relying on the repeated squaring delay function. So this function is defined with respect to some cryptographic group G. It takes as input some group element x, and the output of the function is x raised to the power of 2 to the t. And it's not hard to see that this is indeed computable in time t times some polynomial in the security parameter, simply by t repeated squarings. So this function was proposed back in 1996 by Vives, Shamir, and Wagner as the basis for the time lock puzzle, which is a related notion. And the fact that this is indeed a delay function is based on an assumption that states that this computation cannot be sped up below time t, at least in certain groups. And it's not hard to see that in order for this assumption to be even possible in some cryptographic group G, this group has to be a group of unknown order, meaning it should be difficult to compute the group's order given the group's representation. We currently have two families of groups that serve as candidate groups for such an assumption. So these are the family of RSA groups and specific subgroups of RSA groups, and the class groups of the imaginary quadratic number fields. Now, going back to VDFs, the way you get a verifiable delay function from this delay function is by augmenting it with a proof of correct exponentiation. So this is a protocol in which a prover convinces a verifier that some group element y is indeed equal to x raised to the power of 2 to the t. So such protocols were constructed by some recent work, starting with the works of Pietrzak and Wesolowski. And the way you get a non-interactive proof from this protocol is simply by applying the Fiat-Shamir heuristic. Now, in some scenarios, you might be interested in verifying not just one, but many VDF outputs at the same time. And as concrete examples, you can consider the example of verifying that some storage service maintains many copies of your file via some VDF-based proof of replication. So this is one example. Now, the naive solution in order to achieve this verification of many VDF outputs is simply by having the prover compute a proof for each output, and then the verifier simply verifies each proof separately. And the downside of this approach, of course, is that it results in a linear blowup in both the proof size and the verification time. So the question that we ask is, can we do better than that? So in order to answer this question, we'll take a look at the related work from over 30 years ago. So this is the seminal work of Belarga and Rabin that studied the question of batch verification of exponentiations in cyclic groups of known order. So the setting in their work was the following. You have a bunch of exponents, x1 through xn, and a bunch of group elements, h1 through hn, and you want to verify that g is equal to xi for every I, and some publicly known generator g of the group. So BGR presented two main procedures in order to do this more quickly than simply computing g to the xi for every I. And what we want to do is we want to somehow translate their procedures to the VDF setting. And now there are two issues that we need to be minded of when doing that. So the first is that in the VDF setting, we're in a setting where we have an external prover, and the verifier takes in some external proof and uses this proof in order to verify the computation. So there's an additional parameter that we need to be minded of, which is the proof length or the communication complexity in the interactive setting. The second issue that we need to be minded of is that the more efficient procedure presented by BGR inherently relies on the fact that the group is a group of prime order. And as we mentioned before, the candidates that we currently have for groups in which we know how to construct VDFs are not groups of prime order. So an initial first step was already taken by Veselovsky in translating some of these ideas to the VDF setting. And in an updated version of his original work, he presented a batch version of his protocol. So instead of simply providing a different proof for every output, he showed how to compute all the outputs alongside one shorter proof that asserts the validity of all of these outputs. So this is great. Two things that are left to be desired by this work is first that this is not, at least in the way that it was presented, not a generic transformation. So it's simply a batch version of Veselovsky's protocol, and it's not presented as a general compiler that can take any proof of correct exponentiation for a single instance and transform it into a batch proof for many instances. But more serious issue is that the analysis of this batch protocol relies on the adaptive root assumption, which is a relatively new and strong assumption in groups of unknown order. So relying on this assumption is essentially for free if you consider Veselovsky's protocol, because the single instance protocol also relies on the adaptive root assumption, but it is stronger than the assumptions needed for other proofs of correct exponentiation. So for example, Pietek's protocol relies on the low order assumption, which is weaker. And a recent protocol by Block et al. Is actually an information theoretic protocol that doesn't rely on any assumption. Okay, so we want to somehow get rid of this adaptive root assumption. So in this slide, what we do in this work is the following. So we present general and modular techniques for batch verification of VDFs, focusing specifically on proofs of correct exponentiation. So we define a suitable soundness notion, and then we present two compilers that improve upon the naive solution, simply producing n different proofs. One compiler that works in any group and doesn't make any group-specific assumptions, and one compiler which is specifically based on the low-order assumptions. So both of these compilers extend the ideas of BGR to the VDF setting. Now, it's not hard to see that. So the low order assumption essentially says that you cannot come up with a group element that has low order together with the order. So it's not hard to see that this assumption doesn't hold in RSA groups, since -1 is also always an element of order 2 in the group. So we also have specific protocols for RSA groups for the specific case where the modulus is the product of two safe primes. So first of all, we show how to extend the low order compiler to such groups. And we also present an information theoretically proof of correct exponentiation in these groups that has better parameters than the information theoretic protocol of Blocket. Now, just to give you a sense of the parameters in our protocols. So what's important to note here is that in both protocols, the communication complexity or proof size in the non-interactive setting is essentially independent of the number n of instances that you wish to verify. And the verification time still linearly depends on the number of instances, but we decouple the dependency on the number of instances to be verified and on the original verification time of the single instance protocol. So even if the single instance protocol has quite an expensive verification time, you essentially still only pay for it once instead of once per each instance that you want to verify. Okay, so with that, I'll conclude and take your questions. Thank you.
All right, let's thank Lior and all the speakers of the session again. We're gonna have a coffee break now. We'll resume in an hour. At 3.